Salutations one and all, and welcome to RWBY Revisited. Armor. It's a pretty awesome thing. It might conjure up the image of a knight or samurai clad in steel, or Master Chief in Mjolnir, or maybe even Iron Man. But that's not all it is. Even things as simple as a hard hat used on construction sites, a bike helmet, or even wearing gloves when you're handling sharp things can be considered armor. We even have ballistics vests in modern times. So why don't Huntsmen and Huntresses use it more often? Please note that spoilers for all currently released volumes will follow, and any material featured in the show will be weighted more heavily than anything revealed or expanded on in supplementary material. Now I know what you're thinking. Dual-Wielder. Characters like Jean and Pyrrha wear armor. And you'd be correct, but only partially. Let's start with Jean.
I am bulletproof!
He's got a heater shield, so that's a bonus. He also wears a cuirass, which is also great, but all he's got underneath that is a hoodie. This leaves his stomach and lower back exposed. He does have pauldrons, but they're designed in a way that leaves the top of his shoulders exposed, and moving down his arms, he has these weird semi-counter pieces to protect the back of his elbows, but the entire middle of his arms are almost unprotected. There's nothing below his lower chest, so his legs are completely vulnerable once his aura's gone. There's no Frald or Tassets to protect his waist area, no Greaves or Sabatons or anything. On top of that, there's nothing to protect his neck and head. In medieval times, if someone could only afford one piece of armor, they'd get a helm. Your head is the thing that you need to protect most of all. Then there was Pyrrha. Most of her legs were protected, but the rest was spotty. It looks like there was a breastplate set into her torso piece, but we can't tell if that goes all the way around her body. It also exposes most of her chest and her stomach. Her pelvis region is similarly unprotected, and she only has scattered and small pieces protecting her arms, and her head's also vulnerable. Armor's supposed to protect you first, Pyrrha. Looking good in it is a secondary concern. Ozma also wore armor before humanity was annihilated, though he too leaves large sections of his body exposed and only has basic clothes underneath instead of any kind of padding or something like chainmail. Everyone else has next to nothing. Now I know that aura's a thing that protects Huntsmen and Huntresses, but aura doesn't last forever. What happens when that breaks? Clothes do very little to protect you from damage, and when you're fighting Grimm or other enemies for a living, you might want to do something to make sure that you can keep making a living. But we have to ask ourselves, does aura extend outside the person's body and protect what they're wearing as well? I'm inclined to believe that it does, as we don't normally see characters' clothing or items on their person getting damaged until their aura's been broken, or if there's an exception like Tyrion's semblance. This would mean that if someone was wearing armor, then they would still take damage to their aura, but this doesn't mean that they shouldn't wear it. The force of impact from, say, a Grimm striking you would be dispersed across the armor's surface, just as an impact would affect a knight's armor. This means that it wouldn't transfer as much force, and thus the attack wouldn't deplete as much aura.
You can't hurt me, Jack. What did I just say?
The second route is that if the aura does not protect the armor, then this would drastically increase how long a huntsman's aura would last in a fight. They would still take a hit, but again, the dispersal of force would drain much less aura than if they were to get hit without it. Just think about it. How many times have we seen damage that could have been countered just by wearing armor? What about this? Or this? Or how about this? Or even this? And this? Or perhaps this? Mayhap even this? Okay, I know you're not stupid. You get the point. All of these instances would have either been prevented or at the very least made lesser if the character in question had been wearing armor. There's a reason humans have used it for centuries, lasting even to the modern day. But Dual-Wielder, I hear you say. Armor's heavy and cumbersome. There's no way that Huntsmen and Huntresses could fight like they do in it. That is a misconception. I don't know how the idea that knights and samurai couldn't move effectively in their armor came to be, but it couldn't be more false. If warriors couldn't move and fight in their armor, then they wouldn't have worn it. If you want more proof of that, don't just take my word for it. Check out Metatron's channel. He's done tons of videos on this exact subject to prove it.
Now that's quality content. That's the kind of stuff that I can really appreciate. I stand by this and whatever this is.
Now we all know that the fight scenes in RWBY are flashy. A lot of the choreography involves characters leaping about and moving in ways that we just can't do in the real world. This is clearly following the rule of cool. Unless the people of Remnant simply have less mass than we do, the design choice to give characters armor wouldn't affect this. But on that note, all the flying about and jumping attacks characters do is a terrible thing to do in a fight. Jumping puts you on a fixed trajectory, meaning that your opponent will know when and where you're going to be. Certain characters can redirect their momentum by firing their weapons, but this just means they're simply changing their direction, and their mobility is still limited unless they have a specific semblance. Not only that, but if you're in the air, you can only generate power with your arms and torso, and you can't drive with your legs. This means that strikes delivered via jumping or falling will be both more predictable and much weaker than if you had just stood your ground. Again, I'm aware that they're following the rule of cool here, but it just doesn't make sense to be in the air like that unless you can fly. Even the Grimm are getting smarter about it. Just look at how Blake got slapped around by that Centaur. I don't have an issue with the fight choreography being stylized, this is just a matter that goes hand in hand with the physics of armor. But what about the elephant in the room? What about guns? Well, we don't exactly have a gauge on how strong the guns in Remnant are. Some of them, like Crescent Rose, seem to be tremendously powerful, while others, like Ren's pistols, seem rather anemic. Remnant's technology differs from ours, so I can't say just how much of a punch their firearms pack on average, but even then, it would be better to have armor and not need it than need it and not have it. Armor could help protect individuals from weaker projectiles, but they'd likely need to rely on their aura for more powerful ones, which is still what they'd have to do without it anyway. There really is almost no downside to these characters who fight for a living wearing armor. Of course, you'd need to train in it to use it effectively, but that's no different from what ancient warriors all around the world did historically, or even huntsmen training their semblances or how to use their weapons efficiently. This would shut down some of the jankier weapons entirely, like Neo's umbrella or Clover's fishing rod. I give those points for being creative, but they just don't have the mass to do any significant blunt force trauma or have an edge to do slashing damage. Neo can only thrust with that setup, and Clover should have been destroyed by any competent opponent.
Stupid! Stupid! Stupid!
Then there's the matter of many huntsmen fighting Grimm for a living. Most Grimm are on par with the average wild animal in terms of intellect, albeit larger and more powerful. Most of them don't possess ranged attacks, and need to get in close to deal damage. This means the armor would be even more valuable against them, keeping a huntsman's aura up for much longer and allowing for more sustained combat. But ultimately, I know that the show relies heavily on the rule of cool, and there's nothing wrong with that. This was just a fun breakdown on what it would be like for characters to be fully decked out in awesome armor instead of just normal clothes. But what do you think about this? Are there any characters that you'd want to see clad in imposing or majestic regalia? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, or found it informative, then feel free to leave a like and subscribe to see more, and may all of you have a weapon in each hand.